Brawl Stars shall achieve balance, because today I'm gonna suggest all of the balance changes that I want to see in the next patch notes, which should come at some point. I mean, has been, I think, almost 1 month since the last balance changes. So I'm looking forward to this one. Hope you enjoyed the video, and let's start today's video with Bull. Now, I think that we have reached a point where Bull is nearly as bad as Doug and Hank. Geez, maybe even Hank is better than Bull in some scenarios. Like, Bull just hasn't been good for a really long time, since the Hypercharge's first appear, if I'm correct. So, because I feel like his Hypercharge it's very easy to get, and because he's meant to be a tank, and because even Daryl, who plays more like an assassin, has way much more HP than Bull, I feel like going for the HP buff, and a very big one, might be the way to go to make Bull actually pretty tanky. So, his HP would be increased from 10,000 to 11,200. Now, I know that this is a very big HP buff, but he needs it, because honestly, he has just been really bad for the longest time. Now, also because of how gadgets and all of that thing works, they work on percentage base from the actual HP. Technically, the first gadget will also receive an indirect buff to the amount of heal received. So from 2000 to 2240, which, let's be real, it wouldn't really change anything, but it's better than nothing, honestly. Next on the list we have Brock, and just like Lou, he would receive a reload time reduction by 0.2 seconds. So his reload time would be reduced from 2.1 seconds to 1.9 seconds. If my math is mathing right now, your reload time with the reload gear would be decreased from 1.785 seconds to 1.65 seconds. So Brock would receive this buff for the exact same reason Lou received his most recent buff to the reload time as well. His projectile it's just too hard to hit, at least consistently at medium ranges. So hopefully with this honestly somewhat tiny reload speed buff, Brock would be a lot more versatile outside of long range maps, because even there he's not really the best. Well, Primo, and honestly he already received a lot of base stat increases, so I think that the only really thing that should be changed right now it is his Hypercharge, which absolutely sucks. So it will receive the two most obvious changes ever, really. To start off, the cost of the Hypercharge would be reduced from 3.33 supers to 2.5 supers, because the Hypercharge is not that good, so it should not cost no way near as much as what it's costing right now. It's absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, the Hyper Super would now also have an increased radius of 0.66 tiles. So this means that your Hypercharge Super would have almost the same range as a Jackie attack, which would be a really massive improvement for El Primo and for his Hypercharge. Next on the list we have Poco, and I want some buffs to his Hypercharge. Start off, the Hypercharge would now also grant you an additional 25% healing to the Super, because for example characters like Byron would receive that treatment, and I feel like it's extremely unfair that Poco did not receive his. So I mean, it just feels the natural law, like he getting that damage boost also technically applied to his Super. And secondly, the shield that he gives with his Super, the Hypercharge Super, the duration would be increased from 5 seconds to 10 seconds. This would not only allow the shield to actually have some extra value, because the shield will not decay nearly as fast, but now the value that you give would go beyond the duration of the Hypercharge, because most of the times you will immediately use the Super after activating the Hypercharge, and you won't cycle the Super nearly as much, because it's just hard to have two Supers in 5 seconds. Very hard to do that. So hopefully with these two buffs, Poco becomes a lot better during this meta, because right now he's kind of mediocre in my opinion. Next we have Rico, and this might be surprising, but I'm not gonna ask for a nerf to his first gadget, we've reached a point where I'm actually very happy with the amount of damage that the gadget does. It's still very strong, but I don't think it's nearly as brain dead as it used to be in different times, so with the first gadget I am already happy. We still have the problem of the hypercharge, which is just still really broken. So all I really want it is the bonus damage of the hypercharge to be reduced from 25% to 15%. It will still grant you the bonus bounce, it will still flood the entire map with your balls, it will just be still very OP, just won't melt tanks as easy as it used to do. Next on the list we have Penny, and I don't know if any of you already dealt with this problem, but from time to time it happens that Penny's mortar deals 3k damage instead of 2400 damage, and this already happened to me quite a lot of times. At first I thought it was the hypercharged cannon because 3000 damage when you compare it to 2400 damage, it's an additional 25%, so I actually thought it was the hypercharge at the start, but these already happened to me even without the hypercharged turret being on the field. So I'm very confused on why this is happening, but please fix this because honestly the more they deal 3k damage, it's way too much. Next on the list we have Gus, and his damage would be reduced from 2240 to 2160. I like playing Gus. His shot, it's very easy to land, he has a really good defensive capability, and he is a decent support, but he just deals too much damage. Like, he almost feels like a sniper counter due to how easy his shot it is to land. So reducing the damage by a tiny bit feels pretty fair in my opinion. Obviously, because of how gadgets work, this would imply also a nerf to the gadget where its damage would be reduced from 2240 to 2160. The exact same nerf pretty much. So hopefully with this buff, Gus will still be very strong, just no way near as broken. Next on the list we have Bo, and I already asked for this one quite a while ago, but I want the limit of mines on the floor to be increased from 3 mines to 6 mines. This would allow you to stack more than just one super onto the field, which would be very good because you could have like some mines split around the map, and that could be very good. With this being said, to actually have an opportunity to have that value, the cost of your super would also be reduced from 9 arrows to only 8. Because it would be kinda hard to actually have 6 mines on the field, because you would need to have 2 supers, and Bo doesn't really cycle the supers that fast. So hopefully with these 2 buffs, Bo will actually become a decent controller. Next on the list we have Ams, and honestly I have kind of a crazy idea, where your hypercharged super would now become the new baseline super. So this means that all of your supers would always deal that spray around yourself and dealing knockback to enemies. These would be extremely good because number one, it would give you more super, it would deal more damage, and it would pretty much solve M's major weakness, which would be enemies approaching too much. With this being said, now you'd also need a new hypercharge, and simply make so that the pushback effect would now be applied 3 times, and each of those pushbacks would now have a 1 second silence ability. Also, each of those shockwaves would have 1.5 second of delay between them. So you activate the super, 1.5 seconds later another pushback, and 1.5 seconds later another pushback. Now, would these be broken? Yes, but the hypercharge, it's actually very hard to get it, so I'm not really too worried about that. The only thing that could be broken would be the baseline super really, but who knows. EMS hasn't been meta for quite a long time, and I already heard so many pros like saying that it's really bad, and truth being said, I never had a problem with any EMS in my life, so they're most likely correct on this one. Next on the list have Stu, and I want a tiny nerf to his HP, from 6400 to 6000. Now, this is not completely reverting the buff that he received a while ago, it would just reduce its effect by 66%. So you would still get an additional 200 HP since like what 4 months ago. I think that was around when he received that buff, if I'm correct. And this is also to compensate how strong he got since the introduction of his new hypercharge. So this nerf seems pretty reasonable because Stu has just been all over the place since he got that hypercharge, and because the hypercharge is honestly so fun and feels so good overall, I don't really want to nerf the actual hypercharge. So the HP nerf it shall be. Next on the list we have Pam, and I want her to receive these 3 following buffs. To start off, her HP would be increased from 9,600 to 10,000, so now she would have the same HP as 8-bit, for example. Secondly, the amount of time that it takes to unload your entire attack would be reduced from 1.05 seconds to 1 second. I know this is a very tiny change, but a buff is a buff. And on top of these, her damage would be slightly buffed from 520 per projectile to 540 per projectile. Hopefully with all of these tiny buffs, Pam would be slightly better, because right now, from what I heard around the entire internet, no one plays her. Next we have Frank, and I'm telling you, this is the last nerf that Frank needs. They already reduced the damage, the HP, the gadget, the star power. There is only one thing really missing that's really making Frank annoyingly strong, which is the hypercharge. Frank should not get the hypercharge that crazy fast, especially when compared to El Primo, for example. Like, the difference is brutal, man. Absolutely insane. So the super cost would be increased from 2.2 supers to get the hypercharge to 3.33 supers. So it would go from, like, I don't know, 4 hypercharges per game to hopefully 3 if you play very well. You cannot just get that much value and that much area control in the entire map, that amount of times in the entire game. It just feels very disturbing in a certain way that a Frank can just destroy the entire game that easily and that fast. That's just the last nerf that Frank needs. Other than this, Frank could potentially become balanced. Next we have a surprising one, Edgar. Honestly, Edgar for the longest time he has just been very bad. Like, he's only really good on some bushy maps, and even there he just does not have the survivability to deal with anything. So his damage would be slightly increased from 1080 per punch to 1140. And on top of that, the super range would very slightly be increased from 6.67 tiles to 7.33 tiles. This is the same range of super as Bonnie without her first star power. Now, Edgar is one of the few brawlers that has been in the game for like 4 years, if I'm correct, and he still didn't receive a single damage buff. And considering damage inflation, that's relatively crazy. Like, a brawler that is meant to be an assassin or a damage dealer still didn't get any damage buff, and he has been kinda bad for a very long time. So honestly, both of these buffs feel pretty justifiable considering Edgar's state right now in the meta. Next we have Grom, and he received the 3 following buffs. To start off, his HP would go back to 6,000. A long time ago it got nerfed, and now it's being increased back from 5,600 to 6,000. Grom does not have any defensive capability, so the bonus HP was kinda needed. Secondly, because we don't want to increase his projectile speed while in the air, because otherwise he could be extremely toxic, instead I'm gonna buff the split projectile speed. When the attack lands and then it splits, now the speed would be increased from 3,000 to 5,000. Pretty much, would be instantaneous. Most of the tanks have around 5,000 damage on their punches, like El Primo, Rosa, Edgar. Their projectile speed is around that, and that thing is instantaneous. So just imagine Grom's projectile just splitting instantaneous the plus sign on the floor. Just to the basic attack, just to remind you of that. And finally, his super, the split range would be increased from 5.67 tiles to 6.67. So it would be in the middle from his long time ago nerf to the split range. I mean, he used to have this sort of area control with the super, he lost it completely. His super damage, it's not really that great, so at least it should cover a decent amount of area in my opinion. Next we have Bonnie, and her cannon form HP would be increased from 9,600 to 10,000 to compensate the slow reload speed, the slow movement speed. The cannon kinda needs that, honestly. And finally, the most important of them all, now when you land with your super after being shot off the cannon, you no longer need to wait 16 seconds to get the super. Now, you immediately have the super. This would allow Bonnie to just get into the safety of her cannon a lot easier, because if I learn anything from Mo, Bonnie needs this buff. Next we have Sam, and it has been a long time since I put Sam on one of these videos, and here's my idea. His recharge rate would be increased from 35% to 47%, but now you would also have the option of choosing the supercharged gear. This means that if you sacrifice one of your gears to be the supercharged gear, this would mean that by only hitting your super to 2 enemies, you would instantaneously get the super back. And I don't think I need to explain why this would be very good, just a really great change. And lastly, make so that his second sword power, instead of being the trash that it is, just make it so that you instantly get your super after 5 seconds of waiting for it. Next we have Maisie, and honestly, the damage buff that she received was way too much. 3,000 damage on a basic attack, Jesus Christ. Like, she can two-shot a lot of brawlers that feels wrong to two-shot without the help of the damage gear. That is without the help of the damage gear, that's the craziest thing. So, the damage would be very slightly reduced from 3,000 to 2,900. Honestly, Maisie just deals way too much damage. I understand that they are trying to make more rewarding to hit your basic attack, but it's not rewarding to hit your basic attack at 0 tiles of distance. Like, 3,000 damage, it's way too much. Absolutely game breaking. So, hopefully, because I don't really see any other thing could nerf for her, the damage nerf seems like the best option. Next on the list have Hank, and even though his last buff did a lot for him, it ended up being not that big of a deal. Like, yes, you can charge your super so much better right now, but the super is still kinda meh. So, just a tiny buff to the super where now all of his projectiles are now slightly guided. Imagine these like Meeple's basic attack. I'm not even saying like Piper's second gadget, like Meeple's basic attack. That's just how tiny the guided thing would be. Honestly, his super has a lot of potential, but it is extremely hard to get that potential for most of the time. Not to mention that Hank is still very easy to counter, so hopefully with this change, his super will be slightly more versatile and it would allow for more recharge rate, which, as you can guess, it would help Hank a lot. Next on the list we have Barry, and I just want a very tiny nerf to the recharge rate of his hypercharge, going from 40% to 35%. So instead of needing 2.5 supers, you would now need 2.85. You get your hypercharge crazy fast, and the potential of the hypercharge, it is so good. Like, it is one of the best hypercharges right now. Like for sure top 10, and you get it so easily. It is a really great hypercharge, and a lot of people are underestimating its power. So trust me, this nerf, it is very well deserved. Next on the list we have Max, and with all of the crazy brawlers being nerfed like Mo, Clancy, Kenji, Max is now a lot better because guess what, now you can play a little bit more passively without being scared of Mo just destroying your entire team. And with this being said, as I already mentioned a lot of previous times a long time ago, her hypercharge is pretty good. Not because of the actual hypercharge, but because you can stack the little bottles that you get from the hypercharge, getting up to 75% of your super recharge automatically, which is broken. So now, all of the hypercharge bottles would no longer have an area of effect. This means that all of you would get the 25% buff, and that's it. No crazy refilling 75% of the super. That's just too strong. Even though it's meant to be like a high skilled technique, it's just too basic. And honestly, this is the only thing that's really making Max that broken, because before she had the hypercharge, she was fine. So hopefully with this nerf, Max becomes balanced again. Next on the list we have Mr. P, and his will be a very tiny yet very strong rework. Now, whenever you place your station, your porter station, it would instantaneously spawn 3 porters in a triangular shape. Number 1, while these 3 porters are active, your base would no longer spawn porters. That's something very important to clarify. And secondly, the delay between each of the porters would start at 5 seconds. So actually, in case you don't know, whenever you place your super, it almost instantly spawns a porter. So now it would take the whole 5 seconds to spawn another porter, the first one even. Just to kinda compensate the massive buff that these would be. These would also convince people to use Mr. P a little bit more defensively, because I feel like that's one of the major things that he's lacking, and these tiny rework to the super would absolutely fix that. Would it make Mr. P broken? Most likely, but it would really fix him, and Mr. P has been bad for so long. Next on the list we have Fang, and I already asked so many times for a rework to this hypercharge to the point where I gave up. Yeah, that's simple. So now I'm just gonna simply ask for a charge rate buff to the hypercharge, where instead of costing you 5 supers, it would now only cost 4. The hypercharge is not that good to be that expensive, and I know that the hypercharge has a lot of potential, but through this entire time, if you play well, you can counter it fairly easy. Like, yes, the bonus damage really makes a difference, only if you use the first star power, and on top of that, the hypercharge just takes too much to get it. That's like its major weakness. So hopefully with this buff, Fang and his hypercharge will become balanced. Doug will now have the healer trait. That's simple, he just needs it. Do it now, please. Next we have Charlie, and I just want her main attack unload time to be reduced from 500 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds. Originally, it used to be 250, and it was really good because you could get your super so easily at close range, do a lot of damage. She already received so many nerfs to the charge rate, to the spiders, to the super. She just sucks right now, because she doesn't really do anything that special. So hopefully with this recently found self-defense capability, Charlie would finally be balanced. Next on the list we have the Monkey, and he will receive 2 very important buffs. To start off, his super charge rate would be increased, so instead of needing 5 hits to get your super, you would now only need 4. Now this is a massive interaction change, because this means that with the help of your first star power, if you landed 4 hits onto an enemy, you could actually escape with the super and then try to attack him all over again. And on top of that amazing buff, his super unload time would also be reduced from 1 second to 0.6 seconds. This would allow you to not die in some very weird frames where it seems that you're already on the sky, but after all you can still die. It feels pretty wanky, honestly, like it shouldn't be like that, but it is. So on top of the super charge rate buff, these buff to the actual super would make wonders to Miko. Melody just reduced the hypercharge bonus damage from 25% to 15%. The hypercharge is very strong, and I just feel like it's a little too much, especially because of her floating notes, so the damage nerf feels pretty reasonable. Next we have Juju, and honestly I am starting to see more and more Juju. It appears that people have realized of how strong she really is, so she needs quite a lot of nerfs. To start off, the HP of Gris would be reduced from 7,200 to 6,000. That thing is insanely tanky. Secondly, because of how the star powers work and everything. This would also mean that the shield that you get from the first star power would be reduced from 2160 to 1800. And I did not forget, the second star power would also get a nerf. The slow duration would be reduced from 1 second to half a second. I am so surprised. We complained for so many times that Gale's second star power is very strong. Half second slow, it's really strong. And then Grease Wrist disappears and he has a 1 second slow. Absolutely crazy. Hopefully with this buff, Juju becomes balanced. Next we have Surge, and surprisingly he's still very strong. I seriously did not expect him to survive the HP nerf. So with this being said, another nerfs. Plural, yes. To start off, his reload time will be very slightly increased from 2 seconds to 2.1 seconds, increasing very so slightly his major weakness, and his gadget would also have a nerf. The second gadget, now instead of giving you 2 full ammo, it will now give 1.5 ammo. So your major weakness would now be even slightly larger, and the gadget that supposedly fixes that, it would also be slightly nerfed. Hopefully with these two slightly nerfs, I already said slightly so many times, Watson would finally be balanced. And now, ending today's video, we have Draco. His damage from his baseline form would be increased from 1400 to 1600, so now he would deal the exact same damage as Shade, for example, which it is a great example of really high reward when you connect the shot well. I feel like Draco doesn't really have that yet. And also the dragon form damage would slightly be increased from 160 per projectile to 180 per projectile. It's a quite big buff still. It's around a 15% buff, because the dragon is very good at consistent pressure, but it just lacks pressure overall. Like, you are either extremely close to the enemy, and in most of the scenarios the enemy destroys you, or you just deal mediocre damage. So hopefully with this buff, Draco becomes slightly better. And there you have it, all of the balance changes that I want to see for the next patch notes. What are your thoughts? Write in your opinion down in the comments below. Trust me, I will read them. And I'll see ya on the next video.